My fellow Singaporeans, today I'm going to reveal to you the dirty CPF HDB scheme that the PAP has concocted to trick Singaporeans of our CPF. Now, for a Singaporean who started working in 2001 and who earns a medium income, by the time he or she retires at 55 in 2035, he or she would be able to accumulate nearly $700,000 in his or her CPF. However, it has been shown by Mr. Leong Zi-Hian that 1 in 8 Singaporeans cannot meet our CPF minimum sum, or nearly 90% of us. So why is that the case? Indeed, $700,000 in our retirement funds is a lot of money. It has been shown in a report by the Manulife Asset Management that Singaporeans actually accumulate the largest pension reserves among the Asian tigers, Japan and the United States. So why is it that we still do not have enough in our CPF? Indeed, several studies have already shown that Singaporeans have the least adequate pension funds. The Asian Development Bank Institute had shown that Singaporeans have the least adequate retirement funds in the Asian countries after Indonesia. The Melbourne Mercer Global Pension Index has also shown that Singaporeans have the least adequate pension among the high-income countries. In fact, the OECD has also shown that Singaporeans have the least adequate pension funds among the Southeast Asian countries, high-income countries, as well as the Asian countries. So why is it that Singaporeans contribute such a high proportion of our income into CPF, yet we accumulate such inadequate pension funds? The first and very basic reason lies with this. Singaporeans earn possibly the lowest interest rates on our CPF in the world. Now, if you look at how much Singaporeans contribute into CPF, at 37%, we contribute the largest proportion of our income into CPF. Yet, the 2.5% interest that we receive on our CPF ordinary accounts is most probably the lowest in the world. Now, what this means is because the CPF is what we contribute and the interest rates are what the PAP contributes. This means that the PAP forces Singaporeans to give the most, yet the PAP would give the least back to Singaporeans. Now, as you would already know by now, the CPF is taken by the PAP to invest in the two investment firms owned by them, Temasek Holdings and GIC. Now, this is how much interest Temasek Holdings and GIC are earning. Temasek Holdings is earning 16% and the GIC is earning 6.5%. However, this is how much the PAP is willing to return to Singaporeans. The PAP only gives Singaporeans 4% on our CPF Special and MediSave accounts, and they only give us 2.5% on our CPF Ordinary accounts. However, because the PAP is earning up to 16% in their investment firms, the interest rate that is not returned to Singaporeans is actually known as an implicit tax. Now, what this means is that Singaporeans are actually paying tax to the PAP from our CPF accounts. So this would explain why, even though Singaporeans contribute such a huge proportion of our income into CPF, we still have the least adequate pension funds in the world. Because the PAP takes our CPF and earn high interest rates on them, but we return very low interest rates back to Singaporeans. However, this is only one reason. There is another more insidious reason. The second reason is how the PAP has extracted our CPF for the purchase of the HDB flat. Now, things are not as simple as they seem on the surface. Now, for a medium income earner who would like to purchase a $300,000 HDB flat, he or she would have to put down a down payment of $15,000 in cash and $45,000 in CPF. This means that he or she would have to put a down payment of $60,000 or 20% of the price of the HDB flat. For the rest of the $240,000, he or she would have to borrow to fund his purchase. Now, take note of this $45,000 that he or she has taken out from the CPF. So if a person would want to borrow from the CPF to fund the $240,000 for 30 years, he or she would need to pay a monthly mortgage of $961 every month. At the end of 30 years, he or she would pay nearly $350,000 in mortgage. What this means is that for a $300,000 flat, a person would have paid $45,000 in CPF down payment, $15,000 in cash down payment, and nearly $350,000 in mortgage. This means that a person would pay more than $400,000 for the flat, or more than $100,000 what the stated value of the flat is. So the assumption that most Singaporeans have would be that if I've paid off my mortgage, that means that I do not have to pay anything else for my flat, right? Well, not really. Because there is something called the CPF accrued interest. You never knew about that, right? Well, so what does the accrued interest mean? According to the PAP, if you have kept your CPF inside untouched, the PAP will pay you a 2.5% interest on your CPF. However, if you were to remove this CPF for your housing mortgage, the PAP will ask you to pay this 2.5% interest back to them. But do you know what this means? Because your CPF is no longer inside, what the PAP is doing is to actually make you pay an interest on nothing. So see if you get this. Logically, when you put your money into the CPF, the PAP will pay you interest for your deposit into CPF. Now say if you want to take $1 out, the PAP will stop paying you interest on it. And if you decide that you want to put the $1 back, you would only need to put $1 back. Now, but here is what the PAP is making you do. When you put your money into the CPF, what the PAP does is it takes over your CPF, turns it into loans and lends it back to you. So say if you want to take out this $1 to pay for your housing mortgage, the PAP will tell you, now that you want to take this $1 out from their CPF bank, you have to pay them a 2.5% interest on the loan that you want to take from the PAP. So instead of just putting $1 back, you have to put $1 back plus a 2.5% interest. Now, but does this even make sense? The CPF is your money. You get to decide how to use your money. Why does the PAP decide to come in, take your CPF over, decide to be the bank, and loan you back the money that is yours in the first place? Now, you're not borrowing money that is non-existent or from someone else. You're taking your own money back to use. Now, how can the PAP come up with such a policy that overrides you as the owner of your own money? Has the PAP ever asked you whether you would agree to such a policy? Or has the PAP ever asked you that they will take your money and charge you interest for you taking your money out? Now, but you shouldn't even be paying a 2.5% accrued interest. In the first place, you're already paying a 2.6% interest on your housing mortgage into the HDB bank. So why is the PAP making you pay another 2.5% interest on this mortgage to their CPF bank? In total, what this means is that you are paying a 5.1% interest on your housing mortgage and not the 2.6% interest that you have been told. So some Singaporeans might say, the CPF is our money. Well, I'm sorry to break the bubble, but it's not your money. The CPF is the PAP's money. They have turned it into their money so that they can invest in the Temasek Holdings and GIC and double charge you interest on your HDB and CPF by making you pay a 2.6% interest on the mortgage and a 2.5% accrued interest. Well, so some of us might say, bo bian lor. No choice what? The CPF want to take our money, take lor. Anyway, the PAP control everything already. What can we do? Lan lan lor. Anyway, it's only 2.5%. It's not too much, right? Actually, that's where it will get very painful. Let's take a look at how much this CPF accrued interest is. Now remember the $45,000 that you paid using your CPF. Yes, you have to pay a 2.5% accrued interest on it as well, because the PAP says that you need to pay the accrued interest on all money that you take out from the CPF. So how much is this accrued interest? After 30 years, this accrued interest would be $47,812, or actually more than 100% higher than the down payment. So this is shocking, right? What about the CPF accrued interest that you have to pay on your mortgage? The mortgage is nearly $350,000. After 30 years, you have to pay a CPF accrued interest of nearly $173,000. Now this CPF accrued interest is half of your mortgage. So the CPF accrued interest that you have to pay is $47,812 on your down payment and $172,983 on the mortgage. In total, you would have to pay more than $220,000 in accrued CPF interest back to the CPF. Now let's look at the whole picture. The thing about the CPF accrued interest is that, well, most Singaporeans do not know about it. Do you know about it? In fact, most probably the only place that you can find information on this CPF accrued interest is on the CPF website, which explains to you how much you have to pay if you sell your HDB flat. And in truth, most Singaporeans only know about this CPF accrued interest when they want to sell their HDB flat. That is when they realize, what? I have to pay a CPF accrued interest? Well, that's a lot of money. So how much money is that? Do you know that if you do not sell your HDB flat and you do not know about this CPF accrued interest, the CPF accrued interest will keep growing and growing. In 30 years, the CPF accrued interest would have grown to more than $220,000. In 40 years, the CPF accrued interest would have grown to nearly $400,000. In 50 years, the CPF accrued interest would have grown to more than $600,000. Now, this is only the CPF accrued interest. We haven't even included the mortgage that you pay on your HDB flat. So what happens when you include the mortgage that you pay? Now after 30 years, your mortgage ends. You would have paid $405,960 in mortgage. And this mortgage would end after 30 years and you would not need to pay any more on the mortgage. So in total, in the 30th year, including the $200,000 that you would have paid into CPF accrued interest, in 30 years, you would pay more than $600,000 for the $300,000 HDB flats. In 40 years, you would pay more than $800,000. In 50 years, you would pay more than $1 million for the $300,000 HDB flats. Now, why is this the case? Because if you do not know about the CPF accrued interest and you do not pay it back, it keeps increasing and increasing. So what this means that after 30 years, you would have paid more than $320,000 in mortgage and CPF accrued interest. This means that for your $300,000 flat, you are actually paying more than $600,000 for it, or more than 2 times the stated value of your HDB flat. You're not paying $300,000, you're paying $600,000. Did you even know this? So in 30 years, you would have paid more than $600,000 for your HDB flat. In 40 years, you would pay more than $800,000. And in 50 years, you would pay more than $1 million. And according to the HDB, the flats cost only $300,000. But if you do not know about the CPF accrued interest, you're going to throw $700,000 down the drain. In 50 years, the HDB flat will cost you more than 3 times the stated value of the flat. Now, $700,000 is a lot of money. It can allow you to retire very comfortably, but how many of us know about this CPF accrued interest? Now, why does the PAP even put this accrued interest? Why does the PAP want to earn this money from us? Now, in fact, what this means is that after 30 years, we are paying $600,000 on the $300,000 flats, which according to the PAP will have zero value at the end of the lease. So why are we paying $600,000 or more than $1 million after 50 years if at the end of the lease of the flats, we get nothing back? So why are we throwing $1 million down the drain? So what this means is that what we are not told or what we do not know is that we have to pay an additional 2.5% accrued interest on the CPF loan. This 2.5% interest will amount to more than $200,000 after 30 years. And at the end of 30 years, we would have to pay more than $600,000 on the $300,000 flats. Now, so you might ask, what does this mean to me, or how would it affect my CPF retirement funds? Now, if you had bought the flats with your spouse, and assuming that each of you would pay 50% of the mortgage, you would have paid a monthly mortgage of $481. So what this means is that including for the mortgage and the CPF accrued interest, you, on your own, would have paid more than $300,000 for your flat. And your spouse would also have paid more than $300,000 for the flat. Then, how much would you have left in your CPF after paying more than $300,000 for the flat? If you had started work in 2001 and are a medium income earner, after paying for the mortgage and the CPF accrued interest, you would have $370,000 left in your CPF. Now, compared to how much you would have if you had not used your CPF to pay for the mortgage and the CPF accrued interest, you would have nearly $700,000 in your CPF. So what this means is that because you have to take your CPF out to pay for the HDB flat, you lose more than $300,000 in your CPF and you're only left with $370,000. So by now, do you see how terrible the situation is? First, the PAP forces you to sacrifice a massive chunk of your income into the CPF, and the largest sacrifice that anyone has to make in the world. Second, you have to buy a HDB flat, and if you use your CPF to pay for the HDB flat, you have to sacrifice half of your CPF retirement funds for the HDB flat. Now in total, you are paying more than 200% the stated value of the HDB flat. So what this means is that at 55 years old, you're only left with half of what you had put into the CPF. And for a medium income earner, this is only $370,000. Now, but do you think that it was going to be so easy? Do you think that the PAP would let you take this $370,000 and retire? Now, how wrong we are. There's still the CPF minimum sum. Now, if you look at how much the CPF minimum sum has grown since 1988, it has grown from $31,000 to $148,000 last year. Now, you would see a sharp increase in the CPF minimum sum in 1996 and a sharp increase in 2009. In fact, in 1996, the CPF minimum sum suddenly increased by 12.5% and continued to increase by more than 10% for the next few years. And in 2009, the CPF minimum sum suddenly shot up all the way by 10.4%. Now, since 1998, the CPF minimum sum has shot up by more than 400%. Now, if you look at how much the CPF minimum sum has increased on average every year, it has increased by 6.4%. But if you compare this to inflation, inflation has only gone up by 2% every year. This means that the CPF minimum sum is growing by 3 times as fast as the inflation. Now, pray tell, why do we need such a huge increase in the CPF minimum sum? So if the CPF minimum sum continues at a 6.4% increase, this means that when a person turns 55 in 2035, the CPF minimum sum would have gone up to nearly $580,000. So what this means is that Singaporeans wouldn't be able to meet our CPF minimum sum at all in 2035. The CPF minimum sum would have been nearly $580,000. But if you remember, after paying off the HDB mortgage and the CPF accrued interest, a medium income earner would have only $370,000 left in his CPF. This means that he or she would not be able to meet the CPF minimum sum by a shortfall of more than $200,000. So as we've said earlier, today nearly 90% of Singaporeans are not able to meet the CPF minimum sum and are not able to save and retire. This looks like it's not gonna end. In 2035, Singaporeans would still not be able to save and retire because we would still not be able to meet the CPF minimum sum. But let's assume that perhaps the CPF minimum sum might go on a slower increase. The average increase for the CPF minimum sum has been 6.4%, and for inflation it has increased by 2%. So if we take the midpoint of 4%, the CPF minimum sum would still increase to $350,000 in 2035. So what this means is that after spending for the mortgage and the CPF accrued interest, we would have $370,000 left. But this is only $19,000 more than the CPF minimum sum if it had grown by a slower rate. In 2035, accounting for inflation, the $19,000 would last us barely half a year. Now, but do you know when the CPF minimum sum was instituted and what the reason for it was? In 1984, PAP wanted to delay the retirement age from 55 to 60 years of age. However, this was badly received. So what the PAP did was to implement a CPF minimum sum at 55. It trapped the money inside the CPF such that Singaporeans are not able to withdraw this money and retire. We are thus forced to work even longer. So the CPF minimum sum actually becomes a way that the PAP uses to delay the retirement age of Singaporeans without actually delaying it. But it wasn't so bad initially. Up until 1995, the CPF minimum sum was growing at 2.3% every year, which is similar to the inflation rate of 2.3% every year. However, from 1996, the CPF minimum sum grew by 7.6% every year, when inflation grew by only 1.8%. This means that the CPF minimum sum was growing by more than 4 times faster than the inflation rate. Now, why would the PAP need to adjust the CPF minimum sum by so much more way and above inflation that Singaporeans can no longer now meet the CPF minimum sum, cannot save, and cannot retire? So what the PAP has done is to spike up the increase in the CPF minimum sum, and not only that, but to split the CPF interest rates to the ordinary account and the special and MediSave account, so that it gives the illusion that we are receiving a high interest on one account, and to push down the CPF interest rates to the lowest to date ever since 1963. At 2.5%, the CPF interest rates is as low as what Singaporeans had gotten from 1955 to 1963. And the 2.5% interest rate is most probably the lowest interest rates that any citizen in the world earns on their social security. So the question is, why would the PAP do such a thing like that? Why would the PAP do something so illogical and hurt Singaporeans so much? Now, if you look at the timeline, in 1984, the PAP wanted to increase the retirement age. So the PAP implemented the CPF minimum sum to soften the impact. Singaporeans are forced to leave a lump sum inside the CPF. So Singaporeans are only able to withdraw the CPF at a later age. So what this means is that we cannot withdraw our CPF at 55, and we have to wait longer and longer to be able to take the money out. We have to keep working. So the PAP has effectively found a way to delay retirement age by using the CPF minimum sum. In 1994, the PAP reduced CPF interest rates to the lowest level ever at 2.5%. In 1996, they suddenly split the CPF interest rates to the ordinary account and the special and MediSave account to give the illusion that one is earning a higher interest than the other. And finally, in 1999, the PAP pushed down the CPF ordinary account interest rates to the lowest level at 2.5% again. So the PAP gives us interest rates between 2.5% and 4%, when this should be the interest that we should be earning. We should be earning 6.5% to 16% because this is what our CPF is actually earning. So finally, let's look at the big picture. How did the PAP trick Singaporeans such that we now have the least adequate retirement funds and we are not able to save and retire? First, the PAP forced Singaporeans to pay the highest CPF contribution rate in the world of 37%. Second, the PAP split the CPF interest rates to the ordinary account and the special and MediSave account to give the illusion that one receives a higher interest than the other. Then, the PAP pushed down the interest rates on the ordinary account to 2.5%, or the lowest that Singaporeans have gotten since 1963 and the lowest possibly in the entire world. So with what Singaporeans have accumulated in the CPF, the PAP has already calculated this. And with this, the PAP calculates how much they need to increase the price of the HDB flats so that they can extract your CPF out. The PAP forces Singaporeans to pay a high 2.6% interest rate on the HDB flat mortgage. And then they force us to pay an unreasonable and illogical accrued 2.5 interest rates to lend us our CPF. Finally, after extracting our CPF to pay for the HDB mortgage and extracting our CPF for the accrued interest, the PAP puts in a CPF minimum sum which traps the rest of our money in the CPF. Now, so much so that up until last year, the PAP has accumulated 253 billion from our CPF. However, Singaporeans were only able to withdraw 15 billion in our CPF last year, which is only 5.9% of the total amounts inside the CPF. So, many Singaporeans think that the CPF is our money, but it's not. If it's our money, why are we withdrawing only 5.9% from our CPF? If it is our money, why has the PAP managed to use our money to accumulate billions in the CPF when nearly 90% of Singaporeans are not able to save and retire? Now, where has all our money gone? It's not really our money, is it? The CPF is not our money. The PAP has found a way to prevent Singaporeans from taking what is considered our money out. Now it's no longer our money, it is their money. So the whole entrapment plans work such that out of your whole wage, the PAP forces you to pay the highest CPF contribution rate in the world, and from your CPF, the PAP has calculated how much the price of the HDB flat should go up so that they can extract a part of your CPF out for the housing mortgage, they can extract a part of your CPF out for the accrued interest, and with whatever is left, they can put in a CPF minimum sum to trap the rest of your money inside the CPF. Here you go! The grand plan that the PAP has concocted to trap your CPF. It is not your money. So your CPF is gone to the housing mortgage, gone to the CPF accrued interest, gone to the CPF minimum sum. Now let's take a final look. Your CPF is not your retirement fund. The CPF is a bank for the PAP. Your HDB is not your home. Your HDB is a bank for the PAP. What the PAP has done is to force Singaporeans to deposit 37% of our wages into the CPF bank. Then, the PAP creates the HDB bank and makes Singaporeans deposit a part of our CPF savings into the HDB bank via the housing mortgage. And third, the PAP sets a high deposit level in the HDB bank to force Singaporeans to transfer even more CPF savings inside their HDB bank. And to increase the deposit level, the PAP does so by increasing the prices of the HDB flats. So on the money that they have forced you to deposit into their CPF bank, they give you a low 2.5% interest on your CPF savings. The PAP then takes your CPF and put it inside their CPF bank and tell you that they're going to lend you your CPF and forces you to pay a 2.5% interest on what they are going to lend you, which is actually your money and you shouldn't be paying an interest on it. The accrued CPF interest is rubbish. Then, just like how the PAP has set a high deposit level in their HDB bank, the PAP forces Singaporeans to put in a minimum deposit in the CPF bank by implementing a CPF minimum sum, so that you are not able to withdraw money from the CPF bank until you are able to meet this minimum deposit level in your bank account in the CPF. So by now, the CPF has accumulated more than 250 billion with your money, which is no longer your money. And it now belongs to the CPF bank that the PAP owns. And how much has the HDB bank accumulated? 300 billion? Now in total, you are losing billions of dollars to the PAP because of an insidious scheme that they have concocted just to trap your CPF, and they have increased the prices of the HDB flats to such an extravagant level that you are also forced to pay high prices on the HDB flats. Now where is all your money going? It's going back to the PAP. Look, the PAP is giving you money, but they're not really giving it to you because they have found so many ways to take it back. Not so much so that Singaporeans are just simply not able to save and retire.
Well, the solutions are to increase wages, reduce the CPF contribution rates, and increase the CPF interest rates. However, the solutions are not the question. The question is whether the PAP is willing to implement these solutions. And I think the answer is clear. Now, Singaporeans, this insidious scheme that I have just revealed is not the only scheme that the PAP has concocted to cut down on Singaporeans. There are many others. Now it is time that we choose to be aware. It is time that we choose to stand up for our rights. We need to be aware to know what is going on in Singapore, and we need to know how policies and how everyday things are going to affect our lives. Now our wages are our livelihood. Our CPF is our retirement, and HDB is our home. The PAP cannot take what is ours and turn it around for themselves. Now Singaporeans, we need to stand up. We need to come together and we need to fight. We need to fight for a Singapore that is ours. We need to think for ourselves, our children and their children. Singapore is our home, and we need to be part of the solution. We need to put in place a government that would listen to us, and we need to put in place a government that would allow us to partake in the governance and not to silence Singapore and take us out of the equation. It is time to stop standing alone. It is time to stop fearing. Now what is there to fear when your life is at stake, when your country is in danger? Now this is not the time to fear, this is not the time to be scared. This is the time for us to rise up together and to take control of our country and to fight for it. Now together we can create a place that we can be proud of. And we need to believe in one another so that we can create a society where all Singaporeans can be happy, can be protected, and where we can live in a society which is as equal as we can achieve. On the 3rd of May, we will be holding an event to fight for the rights of Singaporeans to fair wages and rightful employment. Join us, take a stand, come down to Hong Lim Park and make yourself heard. Now we need to stand up and we need to keep fighting and to keep championing for our rights. We need to keep coming together and we need to take a stand. Now for change to come, it has to come from within us and it has to come from us.